May 10, 1940, 5:35 a.m. The French-Belgian border. French soldiers are drinking coffee in their bunkers. They've been here for 8 months. Nothing has happened. They call it the phony war. Some are playing cards. Others are writing letters home. They're bored. The Germans are just sitting there on the other side of the border, doing nothing. Then, at exactly 5:35 a.m., the sky turns black. 1,200 German aircraft cross the border simultaneously. Dive bombers, fighters. The sound is deafening. Within minutes, Belgian and Dutch airfields are obliterated, communications towers destroyed, roads bombed, and behind the aircraft, 2,500 tanks are already moving. In 6 weeks, France will surrender. The British will evacuate. Western Europe will belong to Hitler, and the world will ask the same question for the next 80 years. How did France, with the largest army in Europe, collapse in 45 days? This is the Battle of France, the military disaster that changed everything. And it happened because of one forest, one decision, and one massive miscalculation that cost millions of lives. Let's go back to September 1939. Germany has just invaded Poland. Britain and France declare war on Germany. Everyone expects the Western Front to explode immediately, just like World War I. Trenches, artillery, mass slaughter. But nothing happens. The Germans sit on their side of the border. The French sit on theirs. For 8 months, almost no fighting occurs in the West. Historians call this the phony war, or Blitzkrieg, the sitting war. Soldiers are literally bored to death. Why? Because France thought they were invincible. They'd spent the entire 1930s building the Maginot Line. This wasn't just a defensive position. This was a fortress system that ran along the entire Franco-German border. Underground railways, artillery bunkers, living quarters, air conditioning. These weren't trenches. These were underground cities, built to stop any German invasion cold. And the French were absolutely convinced it would work. French military doctrine in 1940 was based on one assumption. The next war would be just like the last war. Trenches, attrition, defensive lines. They'd learned from World War I that attacking was suicide. Defense wins wars, so they built the most impenetrable defensive line in human history and waited for the Germans to smash themselves against it. There was just one problem. The Maginot Line didn't extend all the way to the English Channel. It stopped at the Belgian border. Why? Because Belgium was an ally. The French couldn't fortify the Belgian border without implying they didn't trust Belgium. So they left a gap, a massive gap, and they assumed that if Germany invaded, they'd come through Belgium, just like World War I. And that's exactly what the French High Command was preparing for. The French had a plan. It was called the Dial Plan. Here's how it worked. The moment Germany invades Belgium, French and British forces rush north into Belgium to meet them. They establish a defensive line along the Dial River. They hold the Germans there. Then it becomes World War I again. Trenches, attrition, eventual Allied victory. It was a perfectly reasonable plan based on World War I experience. Defensive warfare. Hold the line. Wait for the Americans to show up in a year or two and tip the balance. The problem? The Germans weren't planning to fight World War I again. They were planning something completely different. Something the French couldn't even imagine. And the architect of this plan was a man the German High Command thought was insane. Erich von Manstein was a German general with a radical idea. Every other German general wanted to invade through Belgium, just like 1914. It was the obvious route. Flat terrain, good roads, straight shot to Paris. But Manstein said, What if we don't do the obvious thing? What if we do the impossible thing? He proposed invading through the Ardennes Forest. The Ardennes is a heavily forested, hilly region in southern Belgium and Luxembourg. French military intelligence had studied it extensively and concluded, tanks cannot operate in the Ardennes. The terrain is too rough. The roads are too narrow. It would take a German tank column weeks to get through, and they'd be completely vulnerable to air attack the entire time. So the French put their weakest units there. Old men, reservists, second-rate divisions, because nobody thought the Germans would come through the Ardennes. Manstein said, "That's exactly why we should do it." He proposed massing 2,500 tanks and pushing them through the Ardennes in 3 days. Not weeks, 3 days, before the French could react. Then, once they break through, the panzers race west to the English Channel, cutting off the British and French armies in Belgium. Trap them, surround them, destroy them. The German High Command thought Manstein was crazy. They rejected his plan multiple times. But then Adolf Hitler heard about it, and Hitler loved it. Why? Because it was bold. It was risky. It was the kind of insane gamble Hitler thrived on. So against the advice of his own generals, Hitler approved the Ardennes Plan. And on May 10, 1940, it began. May 10, 1940, 5:35 a.m. 1,200 German aircraft cross into Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg simultaneously. Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers scream down on airfields, destroying aircraft on the ground before they can take off. Dutch and Belgian air forces are obliterated in hours. Paratroopers drop behind enemy lines, seizing bridges and creating chaos. In Belgium, German glider troops land on top of Fort Eben-Emael, supposedly the most powerful fortress in Europe, and capture it in less than a day using shaped charges to blow through the steel cupolas. The Blitzkrieg has begun, and the French react exactly as the Germans predicted. French and British forces rush north into Belgium to execute the Dial Plan. The best French divisions, the entire British Expeditionary Force. They're racing to set up defensive positions along the Dial River. They think they're stopping the main German attack. They have no idea they're walking into a trap, because while everyone is looking at Belgium, something else is happening in the Ardennes. Southern Belgium, the Ardennes Forest. May 10th. A French reconnaissance pilot flies over the Ardennes and reports what he sees. A German tank column stretching over 100 miles. Bumper to bumper. 2,500 tanks, trucks, artillery, all crawling through narrow forest roads in a massive traffic jam. The French High Command receives this report and doesn't believe it. It has to be a mistake, or a diversion. There's no way the Germans would send their main tank force through the Ardennes. It's tactically insane. They'd be completely exposed. One airstrike could destroy the entire column. So the French do nothing, and the German tanks keep moving. For 3 days, this massive armored column pushes through the Ardennes. The roads are so narrow that in some places, only one vehicle can pass at a time. The Germans are completely vulnerable. If the French had bombed them, it would have been a massacre. But the French don't bomb them, because the French High Command still doesn't believe this is the main attack. They think the real attack is in Belgium, so they leave the Ardennes almost undefended. By May 12th, German tanks reach the Meuse River at Sedan. This is the last major obstacle before open French territory. On the other side of the river, French defensive positions manned by reservists, older soldiers, and second-rate units. And on May 13th, the Germans cross. May 13th, 1940. Sedan, France. The Germans need to cross the Meuse River. Bridges have been destroyed. They need to build pontoon bridges while under fire. This should be impossible. Crossing a river against defended positions is one of the hardest operations in warfare. But the Germans have air superiority. For 8 continuous hours, hundreds of Stuka dive bombers attack French positions on the far side of the river. The Stukas have sirens attached to their landing gear, the famous Jericho trumpets that scream as they dive. The psychological effect is devastating. French soldiers, many of them older reservists who haven't seen combat, are pinned in their bunkers. They can't raise their heads without being hit by bombs or machine gun fire. Communications break down. Officers lose contact with their units. And while the French are being pounded from the air, German engineers are building bridges. By the afternoon of May 13th, the first German tanks cross the Meuse. By evening, an entire panzer division is across. The French try to counterattack, but their units are disorganized, poorly coordinated, and terrified. By May 14th, the Sedan front has collapsed. German tanks are pouring through the gap, and they're not stopping. They're not consolidating. They're not waiting for infantry to catch up. They're racing west, toward the English Channel. This is Blitzkrieg. Lightning war. Speed. Aggression. Don't give the enemy time to recover. Keep moving. Keep the pressure on. Exploit chaos. And the French command structure has no idea how to respond. May 14th to May 20th, 1940. German panzer divisions are now driving west across northern France at insane speed. Some units are covering 50 miles a day. This is unheard of. Tanks aren't supposed to move this fast. They're supposed to support infantry. They're supposed to consolidate gains. But the German tank commanders, Guderian, Rommel, ignore orders to slow down. They keep pushing. Because they understand something their superiors don't. The French are psychologically broken. If you stop now, you give them time to recover. If you keep going, they collapse completely. And they're right. French units are retreating in chaos. Refugees are clogging the roads. Nobody knows where the Germans are. Communications are breaking down. Officers are issuing contradictory orders. Some French divisions surrender without fighting. Others fight bravely, but are completely isolated. By May 20th, German tanks reach the English Channel at Abbeville. Think about what this means. In 10 days, German forces have driven from the German border to the English coast. They've cut the Allied armies in half. Everything north of the Panzer Corridor, the entire British Expeditionary Force, the best French divisions, the Belgian army, is now trapped in a pocket with their backs to the sea. This is the strategic catastrophe. The Germans have done in 10 days what they failed to do in 4 years of World War I. And now the British realize we need to evacuate, or we're going to lose our entire army. May 26th to June 4th, 1940. Dunkirk, France. The British Expeditionary Force and remnants of French units are trapped in a pocket around the port city of Dunkirk. German forces are closing in. The Luftwaffe is bombing constantly. This should be a slaughter. The British begin Operation Dynamo, the evacuation of Dunkirk. The plan is to use Royal Navy destroyers to take soldiers off the beaches. But Dunkirk's harbor has been destroyed by bombing. The beaches are too shallow for large ships, so the British send out a call for every boat in southern England that can float. Fishing boats, pleasure yachts, ferry boats. Hundreds of civilian vessels cross the English Channel under fire to rescue soldiers. For 9 days, this evacuation continues. Soldiers wade into the ocean up to their necks, waiting for boats. German aircraft strafe the beaches. U-boats attack evacuation ships. It's chaos, but it works. By June 4th, 338,000 British and French soldiers have been evacuated to England. The British save their army. They lose all their equipment, tanks, artillery, vehicles, everything. But they save the men. Churchill calls it a miracle of deliverance. But he also warns, wars are not won by evacuations. The British are out, but France is still in the fight. And France is dying. June 5th, 1940. The Germans launch the second phase of their invasion. Fall Rot, Case Red. The objective: destroy what's left of the French army and capture Paris. French forces are exhausted, disorganized, and demoralized. They've lost their best units in Belgium. Their air force is shattered. Their tank forces are scattered. And psychologically, they're broken. German forces push south. French resistance is sporadic. Some units fight fiercely, others collapse immediately. There's no coordinated defense. The French government is paralyzed, arguing about whether to keep fighting or seek an armistice. On June 10th, the French government flees Paris for Bordeaux. On June 14th, German troops enter Paris unopposed. The city has been declared an open city to avoid destruction. German soldiers march down the Champs-Élysées. Swastika flags fly from the Eiffel Tower. The photos are devastating. Paris, the symbol of Western civilization, occupied by Nazi Germany. And in London, Winston Churchill watches and realizes, Britain is next. June 1940. Bordeaux, France. The French government is split. On one side, those who want to keep fighting. Move the government to North Africa. Continue resistance from the colonies. On the other side, those who want an armistice. End the suffering. Save what can be saved. Leading the surrender faction. Marshal Philippe Pétain. He's 84 years old, a hero of World War I, the Lion of Verdun, and he believes France has lost. Continuing to fight will only destroy the country. Leading the resistance faction, Charles de Gaulle, a young, relatively unknown general who believes France must never surrender, that even if the battle is lost, the war continues. On June 16th, Pétain becomes prime minister. His first act, request an armistice with Germany. De Gaulle flees to London. On June 18th, he broadcasts a speech on BBC radio to the French people. France has lost a battle, but France has not lost the war. Almost nobody hears it. Almost nobody cares, because France is broken. June 22nd, 1940. Compiègne, France. Hitler chooses the location for the armistice signing very deliberately. It's the same railway car, in the same forest clearing, where Germany signed the armistice ending World War I in 1918. This is Hitler's revenge. The humiliation of 1918 reversed. The terms of the armistice are brutal. France is split in two. Northern France and the Atlantic coast, occupied by Germany. Southern France, controlled by a collaborationist French government based in Vichy. The French military is disarmed and reduced to a token force. France must pay the costs of German occupation. French prisoners of war remain in German captivity as leverage. Hitler sits in the same chair that Marshal Foch sat in when Germany surrendered in 1918. He listens to the terms being read, then he stands up, does a little victory jig, and walks out without saying a word. The footage of Hitler's jig is shown in newsreels around the world. It's humiliating, devastating. The French are watching their country die. On June 25th, the armistice takes effect. The Battle of France is over. Germany controls Western Europe. Let's talk about casualties. France, 90,000 killed, 200,000 wounded, 1.9 million captured. Britain, 68,000 casualties total. Belgium, 23,000 killed or wounded. Netherlands, 10,000 casualties. Germany, 49,000 killed, 111,000 wounded. Total, 160,000 casualties. But these numbers don't capture the real cost, the psychological cost, the strategic cost. France, the country with the largest army in Europe, with more tanks than Germany, with the Maginot Line, collapsed in 6 weeks. Not because they lacked courage, not because their soldiers wouldn't fight, but because their generals were fighting the last war instead of this war. And now, Britain stands alone. The French military in 1940 was trapped in the past. Their entire doctrine was based on World War I. Defense, attrition. Hold the line. Wait for the enemy to exhaust themselves attacking your fortifications. It worked in 1914 to 1918. Why wouldn't it work now? Because technology had changed everything. In World War I, machine guns, barbed wire, and artillery made attacking almost impossible. Defenders had every advantage, so the war became static. Trenches, stalemate. But by 1940, tanks, aircraft, and radios changed the equation. Suddenly, offense had the advantage again. Tanks could break through defensive lines. Aircraft could destroy fortifications. Radios allowed rapid coordination. The Germans understood this. They built their entire military around speed, mobility, and combined arms, tanks, infantry, and aircraft working together. The French didn't. They spread their tanks out among infantry divisions as support weapons. They didn't concentrate their armor. They didn't practice combined arms. Their air force and ground forces barely communicated. The Germans were fighting a modern war. The French were fighting World War I with slightly better equipment. And that's why they lost. French military leadership in 1940 was a disaster. The supreme commander, General Maurice Gamelin, was 72 years old. He set up his headquarters in a chateau with no radio equipment. He communicated with frontline units by motorcycle courier. In 1940, while the Germans were using radios to coordinate tanks and aircraft in real time. Gamelin's command style was slow, methodical, and completely unsuited to the speed of Blitzkrieg. By the time he issued orders, the situation had already changed. His responses were always too late. On May 19th, 9 days into the invasion, the French government fired Gamelin and replaced him with General Maxime Weygand. But it was already too late. The strategic situation was hopeless. Compare this to the German side. Commanders like Guderian and Rommel were with their troops at the front, making decisions in real time, taking risks, exploiting opportunities immediately. When their superiors told them to slow down, they ignored the orders and kept pushing. The French command structure was rigid, hierarchical, and slow. The German command structure was flexible, aggressive, and fast. In modern warfare, speed wins, and the French were too slow. The Luftwaffe dominated the skies over France. French aircraft were often outdated. The few modern fighters they had were outnumbered and poorly coordinated. French air doctrine didn't emphasize close air support for ground forces, so even when French tanks counterattacked, they did so without air cover. Meanwhile, German Stukas were acting as flying artillery, supporting tank advances in real time. German fighters swept French aircraft from the sky. German bombers destroyed bridges, roads, and communications. The psychological impact was devastating. French soldiers felt helpless. Every time they tried to move, German planes appeared. Every time they concentrated forces, German bombs fell. Air superiority wasn't just a tactical advantage, it was a psychological weapon. And it broke French morale. Here's the thing people don't understand about the Battle of France. The French didn't lose because they were cowards. They lost because their entire worldview shattered in 2 weeks. French soldiers in 1940 believed their military was the best in the world. They had the Maginot Line. They had more tanks than Germany. They had the lessons of World War I. They were ready for a long, defensive war. And then, in 2 weeks, German tanks drove through the impassable Ardennes, crossed the uncrossable Meuse, broke through the defensive line, and raced to the English Channel. Everything the French believed was wrong. That's not a tactical defeat. That's a psychological collapse. When your entire understanding of warfare is proven wrong in 2 weeks, you don't know how to respond. You panic. You retreat. You wait for orders that never come because your commanders are just as confused as you are. The Germans won the Battle of France psychologically before they won it militarily. They moved so fast, attacked so aggressively, and appeared in so many unexpected places that French command and control broke down completely. And once that happens, it doesn't matter how many soldiers or tanks you have. You've already lost. Here's the question historians still debate. Could France have won? Yes, absolutely. If the French had concentrated their air force and bombed the German tank column in the Ardennes on May 10th through 12th, they could have destroyed it. The Germans were completely exposed. If the French had positioned their best armored divisions behind the Meuse instead of sending them to Belgium, they could have stopped the breakthrough at Sedan. If French commanders had responded faster, if they'd had better communications, if they'd understood what Blitzkrieg actually meant, they could have won. France didn't lose because Germany was stronger. France lost because Germany was faster, more flexible, and psychologically prepared for a new kind of war. And that's the tragedy. France had the resources to win. They just didn't have the mindset. June 25, 1940. France has fallen. Western Europe belongs to Hitler. Britain stands alone. The United States is still neutral. The Soviet Union has a non-aggression pact with Germany. For a moment, it looks like Hitler has won, like the war is over. But it's not. The fall of France changes everything. It convinces Churchill that Britain must fight alone, no matter the cost. It convinces Roosevelt that America needs to prepare for war. And it convinces Hitler that he's invincible, which leads him to make the 2 decisions that will eventually destroy him: invading the Soviet Union and declaring war on the United States. The Battle of France was a catastrophic defeat. But it wasn't the end of the war. It was the moment that transformed World War II from a European conflict into a global war. And in a strange way, France's collapse saved the world. Because if France had held, if the war had bogged down into trench warfare on the Western Front, Hitler might have never invaded Russia. The United States might have stayed neutral. The Holocaust might have continued unchecked for years. Instead, France fell. Britain fought on, and the world rallied. The soldiers who died in France in 1940 didn't die in vain. They bought time. Time for Britain to survive. Time for America to mobilize. Time for the Soviet Union to prepare. And eventually, time for liberation. This was the Battle of France. 45 days that changed history. A military disaster. A psychological collapse. And a lesson that's still relevant today. In war, the side that adapts fastest wins. The side that clings to the past loses. And sometimes, losing one battle is what it takes to win the war.